When you touch this water, you don't get wet.
Wait, hold up. What do you mean, don't get wet? It's not water if it's not wet.
Not necessarily. Water isn't wet.
Fuck you mean water isn't wet? It's water.
Yeah, but water isn't wet.
How you gonna stand there and actually say some nonsense like water ain't wet?
Water is the thing that makes other things wet. The property itself can't give itself its own property.
He's right, Naruto.
Bitch, you gonna side with him?
Yeah, I'm gonna side with logic.
Fuck you mean logic. You're the dumb motherfuckers that sit there and say some ignorant ass shit like water isn't wet.
It's not wet.
You fucking heathen.
Listen to her, man.
Water is touching itself all the damn time. Therefore, water is wet.
Water is not wet. It makes other things wet.
That's like saying soap doesn't make itself clean.
It doesn't.
It makes other things clean. Jesus Christ, I can't talk to him, Shika.
Your logic is predicated on the fact that this physical object isn't a physical object that touches other objects. Therefore, you're stupid.
You're basically saying dirt is dirty because when you put it on something other than dirt, it makes it dirty. The dirt itself isn't dirty and water isn't wet.
You're not wet.
Fucking right about that.
If the thing itself is touching itself, it has that property. Am I fucking speaking Chinese?
It has to be something else.
Why?
Because it can't make itself itself.
Lord help us.
Y'all are all really saying water's not wet.
Yes!
Y'all can miss me with that shit. Out of your damn mind.
So this concept of water not being wet is a statement that I've seen in some of my videos before, but I always chose to ignore it because I didn't want to get into the long chat about it. But once I saw this, I thought like, okay, this time I'm in it to win it. Many people who come to the channel would argue that water is not wet, and in the religious format of that how can God be broken up into three parts? Is like the argument of water not being wet or water being wet itself. Now, let's look at it from this point of view. Well, let's start here, not point of view. Let's just start here because it's just facts. Water molecules are made of H2O, right? So you have three parts that makes up a water molecule. One hydrogen, two oxygen makes up water. God, three parts, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. At any point in time, if you separate the water molecule, it is no longer water. It is something completely different, something that is not the same as what it was before. Neither can you add anything to it. When you add something to it, it becomes something different. So in the case of believing in a God that is broken up in three parts, the moment you separate that God into its three parts, it is no longer that God anymore. It is a different thing. And if you ever try to add something to that God, then that God is no longer that God as well. It is something else. Now, the premise here, though, speaking of a God, that just like water can never be anything more than just water. It could look different, but it still has to be the same state, regardless of what vibrational pattern it's in. If it's really cold, then it's solid. If it's not as cold, it's a liquid, and it's really hot, it's a gas. So your God being in different formats, still being itself, still has to be in its totality itself. It is not like a Trinity where Jesus is the ice, God is the water, and the Holy Spirit is the air. You know that. So that doesn't work. It's vapor, it's steam. It doesn't work in that format. For something to be God, it has to always be God at all times and can never change. The Trinity does not fit that same bill by saying it's just God in different states, as water is in different states, because water at all times is always water. Jesus did not know whether or not he was to go through with the whole plan and had to ask, can this change? If he knows that he is God, then he knows that the plan cannot change. He prayed out to his Father, why have you forsaken me? God can never be without itself, otherwise it is not God. So therefore, just like water, when you take a molecule away, it is no longer water. It is something totally different. So therefore, Jesus could not have been. You're also suggesting that Jesus went into the grave. So God went into the grave or Sheol. How can that be? If Sheol is non-existent, or if Sheol is hell, whichever perspective you look at it, how can God be subjugated to the whims of hell? Or how can God be non-existence or an annihilation? That wouldn't work either. So therefore, God is not as good as water, because water is always wet. Water is never not wet. Where is your God in this book, in this Bible? Well, sometimes he's wet, sometimes he's not wet. And it's the same way when, if you look at, when you think about it, when they say in that little cartoon, it was so interesting. And it's not, somebody dubbed over it. So let me be clear. Somebody, that's a dub over. I believe, I don't watch the cartoon, but I'm quite sure that's a dub over. But it's like when you get into these arguments with people and they say like, well, does fire really burn? Hell yeah, fire burns. If not, it has the traits. If it didn't have the traits of burning, it couldn't burn something else. So it is burning. That's the normal, natural trait of it. So a God has to be in that normal, natural trait. Cannot be anything else. Just like you yourself right now. You cannot be anything else but you. Although others try to add to you, others try to take away from you, others try to make you into an image that they desire, at the end of the day, you can only be you. No more, no less. But the difference is from water is you get to choose. Even though there are outside elements that affects the H2O molecule, and there are outside elements that can affect you. Unlike the water molecules, the water molecules are attracted to certain things and detracted from other things, but you have more of a conscious level of reasoning that allows you to be able to choose which direction, which path you want to go. If you dig out a ravine down a mountain and pour water down it, the water is most likely going to follow the channel that you dug out. But in this instance, you are the digger and you are the water. So you get to choose which directional path that you desire to go. Now, many people have been trained to believe in these religions and these concepts of these deities, but not really understand these concepts of these deities. And so they continue to follow suit to just be whatever the current doctrine says that they are supposed to be. However they were raised, whatever they grew up believing, or when some miracle thing happened that they claim to be a miracle, they just don't know the causation of, they all of a sudden believe it and hand it over to this deity. And this deity is not even fully itself, not even fully aware of itself. From the moment that you came into this conscious life, you have been fully aware of you. You have always known you. You have always been with you. But when you look at the doctrine of this book, Jesus is born not knowing he is God. Jesus grows up. We don't know much about his growing up, but when he's 12, and in one of the Gospels, which no other Gospel mentions this, he states that he is about his Father's work. Everything he does, he's saying this for his Father. And then he is left on the cross and asks, why have you forsaken me? He goes down in the Sheol, absence of his Father. If he was God, at no point would he not ever know that he is God. But you have always known that you are you. You have a higher consciousness than the characters that they have created in this book and now pay homage to, because none of them actually exist. Yahweh, Jehovah, El, Elyon, Jesus, none of them actually exist, but yet you are devoting your life to it. You have given your life to it. So now that you have freed yourself and you have walked away from that, understand it is up to you now to create and manifest the greatest version of yourself through your own agency of digging your own channels for how you want to live and who you desire to be. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration. And yes, dirt is dirty.